Aloha synergists, welcome to Form and Function. Now we are going to be narrowing it down into just the human musculoskeletal system with just a few tangents here and there. But form and function and how they arise together, you can see this principle play out pretty much everywhere you look. So in this video, we're going to be having an overview of the more or less ideal human form and function of just the musculoskeletal system. There is a whole bunch of layers where this applies, but that's where we are focusing today. Once we understand some of that, then part two is about how our muscles and our movement patterns actually work and how we can change them, how we can update them once we discover, oh, there's room for improvement here. And if you want bonus points, then look for the law of form and function beyond just the human body. See where else this is relevant, or even in the human body, but not the musculoskeletal system. The more comprehensive your understanding of this law of form and function, the more you will be able to apply it into different levels of your body and your mind. So what factors are we considering when we talk about the more or less ideal musculoskeletal form and function? The human body likes to work in a very particular, specific way. And the factors that we consider here is, what is our postural default? If we close our eyes, take a couple of steps, open our eyes, how are we standing? Throughout the day, we have lots of different movements. We might be on one side. We might be asymmetrical a lot of the day, especially in our sports and whatnot. But the ability for your body to return to neutral without external cues is a really huge thing. That is your musculoskeletal system knowing what is short, what is long, and what is balanced. And so we're going to look at the grid lines there. And then we have our default movement patterns. Next factor we consider are our default movement patterns. So let's say you do a squat, you got flexion at your hip, flexion at your knee, but there's a whole bunch of different muscles doing slightly different things. Some are stabilizing, some are squeezing, some are lengthening. What is going on there? And you can do the same joint movement with a lot of different muscles or in different orders, and these give different results. Some of them develop knee pain or pull your joint out of alignment in the middle of the movement, and some have a really strong healthy motion. And so we're going to get into that as much as we reasonably can within a short video. We're also going to look at the range of abilities. When I say abilities, that's just general like strength, mobility, and speed. And so can we lift our shoulder all the way up? Can we do that with weight? And could we do it fast if we needed to, if we were, a pitcher or something? And the last one we want to look at here is body composition. And when I say body composition, bones, muscle, and fat is what we're looking at here. So what does your brain and body think is neutral? If you close your eyes, take a couple of steps, and you try to stand symmetrically and balanced, open your eyes in front of a mirror, what does that look like? And we are going to do assessments like this and take the photos and draw the lines on it so you figure out exactly where you are right now and how to progress to a more ideal form and function. And so if you look at this little grid line, you'll see two vertical ones running through the load-bearing joints. You got two ankles, two knees, two hips, two shoulders, if you're human like that. And then on the side plane, you have another line that runs through the center of the ear, through the center of the shoulder, center of the hips, center of the knee, and center of the ankle. And very, 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 very few people actually default to this when they just stand there. And it is a journey, and that's why people come to me because they have aches and pains and things not working right. And a lot of it can just be their postural defaults. And I'm talking a lot about this stuff. Or maybe, they have sway back where their hips are forwards of their ankles and forwards of their shoulders, and it puts a lot of pressure on the lumbar. All sorts of things can go on that are not neutral. This is the design function of the body here. The body really is designed to work best in a certain way. And when we don't make that habitual and default to that, then we're basically working in a less than ideal way, and we get all sorts of aches and pains and performance handicaps. Not what we want. Now, when I was looking at this little picture here, I drew the lines on, even though this is like an anatomical model, notice that the head is forwards. This is actually not the ideal posture. In the side view, you can see the head is pretty far forward, at least like an inch to scale or whatever. And the center of the hips is actually a little bit forwards of the shoulder. So he does have sway back. And I know it's not big, but even little things like this, all day, all week, all year, they certainly do add up. A little bit more compression in the back or a little bit more strain in the knee. If we notice something is off every day, we can make a little bit more progress and come into a little bit more of an ideal posture. This guy does do a good job at being balanced left to right. So his shoulders are level, hips are level, knees are level. If you want a quick little hack to see if you're reasonably balanced, look at the height of your hands or the height of somebody's hands as they walk down the street. Often you will see that one hand is hanging a lot lower than the other, and that's due to some sort of asymmetry in the shoulders or the hips or wherever it's coming from. But it looked like a big difference between their hands. Saw it yesterday. And so in the 3 planes of space here, we have our side plane, our front plane, and our rotational plane, which you can see on the pictures on the left there. You'd be able to see any sort of rotation. This guy is symmetrical left to right, but we do see that forward head in there. Another thing that you could observe when you're just standing and you're trying to stand symmetrically is you might look at your feet. Are they pointing straight forwards? Like I describe it like if you had a mirror in front of you, would your toes point at your toes? Or would they be out to the sides or in? It is unfortunately very uncommon to actually see people with straight feet these days for some reason. It's amazing how, like I saw somebody yesterday that actually had straight feet and straight toes. And I was like, wow, that's so rare. And yet they seem super springy on their feet, super athletic in that way, just as they're hanging out. And I'm impressed by that these days because I know how exceedingly rare it is. Most people have everted feet where their feet are pointing pretty severely outwards, often at one foot more than the other, especially in the right leg I see these days. I call it like driver's foot. That's something I've completely made up. But you know, if people have their heel on the floor and then they are on the gas and the foot is being trained to have that rotation out the side just while they're driving all the time, that really adds up, and that might make the habit of your lower leg being steered outwards more and more easy. And if they don't think about it, they don't correct it, and then they keep on walking like that, and then the habit gets worse and things get worse and their knee hurts because there's all this rotational stuff and malalignment. Things spiral down from there, even just something as simple as driving. So that's why being aware of where we want to be, what is ideal, is super essential, super important. You understand this so far? Later on, there is a video on vertical loading that you can check out, but it's kind of unavoidable to talk about it here. What I think is funny is, doing the research to try to find, like postural pictures and whatnot. I go and try to find an image. Like these are not very accurate. That is not the center of his head. The little guy in green, his knee is not in the center there. His hip is not in the center there either. He's got forwards hips relative too. It's like people don't even know what ideal posture is when they try to picture it. Now in these x-rays, you can see obviously there's some scoliosis. And so that's a deviation laterally of the spine in some way. And a lot of people have this and think, oh, I just have scoliosis. I'm pretty darn passionate that you can work to create a straighter spine even if you don't have help from anybody else. Yes, chiropractors can speed up the process, masseuses, they can certainly speed up the process, but you are the one responsible for it. You can actually do a whole bunch just yourself or with simple objects around the house and simple movements. If you know where the deviation is and you're aware of the principles of the body, you can move things back into alignment. In the scoliosis example, or forwards and backs, you can lengthen to relax the muscles and then reset your posture with various exercise therapies, which is what I do. A super common deviation that I really need to address is the hip tilt. Is it tilting backwards? Is it tilting forwards? Is one tilting forwards and one kind of doing something else? The hips are mobile left to right. They have a joint. It's like a cartilage joint like your ribs, so it moves a little bit. And if your hips default to, you can find a bony point here to figure out what's going on. From the top, you go forwards. Oh, there's no muscle covering it. From the top, you go backwards. Again, you'll find a bony point there where there's no muscle covering it. And is it level? Is it tilted? Or is it tilted backwards? This isn't very common, but this is incredibly common. And it creates a very tight lower back. And it comes, now this condition is also called lower crossed syndrome because you've got tight hip flexors, tight back, like that's one of the X's, and then you have long abs and long hamstrings. So if we wanted to go from here, we got the big pooch, and we're trying to stick the booty out. if we brought our hips back to level and defaulted there, then our lower back would be a lot happier instantly, and we would get a lot of sports performance increase without the back pain and everything. We'd also have more engaged abs. We would lose the pooch immediately just by repositioning our hips. Like, I have really low body fat, but if I have my hips tilted like that, it looks like I have a big old belly. Isn't that funny? Now, most of the time, it is not just the simple of both of the hips are rolled forwards like this. Usually one is actually more than the other for whatever reason. And that's why we want to exercise the hips a little bit to kind of warm them up and then start to realign them. So at least both of the hips are doing about the same thing. Not when walking, not when lunging, of course, but when you're just standing and when you're sitting, we want both of the hips to be able to find some symmetry there. And then we do more exercise therapies to realign them forwards and backwards, as well as left to right. The hips I pay so much attention to because they are the center of our body. They connect the upper and the lower body. And if your hips are out, then pretty much everything else in your body is going to be out. Your spine is going to be out, your knees are going to be out, everything is going to be affected just from the hips being slightly off. At least if you have like a broken finger or something, it doesn't make your whole body out of whack. So now that we've had a quick little peep into just the ideal default posture, how do our muscles and our movement patterns work? How can we change what we think is default? The first step is becoming aware of where we are right now and what that ideal posture that we can move into is. We've had a quick look at that. You need to do your own assessments to find out exactly what you are going to do, and we're going to do that in the next section where we do assessments. And then we want to practice the things that start that correction. So that's what this section is about, and we're going to understand how exercise therapies re-coordinate and reposition and allow the body to actually change shape and eventually stay there. Once you practice it enough, then your neurological default, that path in your brain that activates your muscles in the right way, in the right intensity, in the right time, boom, you have integrated that, and that is how you function as a default. Although it takes maintenance and you're never absolutely perfect. If you think you are, take a closer look. There's something to improve there, trust me. So how do our bones move? These are skeletal alignments we saw in those x-rays. How do the bones get there? How do the bones come back to ideal posture? Bones simply do what the muscles tell them to do. And that is why you can control that. You don't need a chiropractor to adjust your joint position because your muscles are doing it all the time. Muscles can pull things shorter or control the lengthening from bone to bone. And they use that through the lever system, levers type 1, 2, and 3. We're going to look at that in a second. These muscles can be activated autonomously or intentionally, and it's pretty much always a combination of both. When you're walking, there's a certain amount of intention that goes into that walk, but your glutes could be shut down and you might be autonomously using your inner leg and your outer leg to actually achieve that walking motion, which is not very efficient and usually leads to some pretty big issues, and you can see it. Or when you go for another walk and you go, oh, I should use my glutes, I need to work on this glute activation, then you might do that same walk down the road, but you're intentionally activating your glutes with each step. It's a slight hill and you can feel it in your glutes. And your inner leg and your outer leg are able to do their real job, which is just stabilizing instead of creating the movement, and happy days. We want to get really good at coordinating the best sequences of activation, stabilization, and relaxation in turn for each of our movements. Even just the basic sitting posture. Obviously we're always moving a little bit. We wouldn't want to just be stacked all the time in perfect posture. That wouldn't be ideal because then we're not pumping blood and moving muscles. We'd stiffen up still. But we do want to default to the right balance of active, stabilized, and relaxed in movement and while stationary. Another thing we're going to look at here is how nerve impulses activate certain motor units, activate certain muscle fibers. I think this is pretty important to understand at least a little bit. And this is the difference between picking up a glass of water and throwing it to the ceiling by using all of your muscle fibers at once, or using controlled motion at the right time, at the right speed, and the right strength demands. Quick check-in before we move on. If you were to stand up right now, what posture fella do you think you were most like? Do you have a head tilt? I had a head tilt after breaking my collarbone here. It adds up. Do you have a high shoulder? One shoulder that sits higher than the other, or one hip that is higher than the other? If you think, oh, one leg's longer than the other, it really is probably just that your hips are out, unless you had severe growth plate trauma when you were a kid or something. Do you have a default slump where your shoulders are round forwards and your back is curled a little bit? Where are you at the moment? And if you want to take this one step further, think of what is more flexed and what is more extended in this position, laterally as well as forwards and back. You know, your abs do flexion, your back muscles do extension. Do you need to extend your upper back more and flex your abs more to come into alignment? Most people in the Western world, that would probably do a lot for them, for their mental health and for their physical health. Straight away. All right, think about that while we're going through the rest of this video. The principle of efficiency is important to understand here. It is everywhere in nature and it is in our bodies as well. And we can change what the most efficient pathway is. So just like your brain is wired in a certain way to make certain movement patterns your default, you can change the pathways in your brain so the more efficient path, the more default path, will activate things in a more ideal way. And when it comes to strength in particular, the same principle applies. Your body will use no extra unnecessary strength to lift up something until it needs it. So I'm using very few motor units in my arm and in my back and all that to lift this pen right now. But if I were to go pick up a 50-pound dumbbell, then I would have to activate a lot more muscle fibers. But we only activate those more muscle fibers when there's a cue to do so, when there is a demand that reach the threshold potential. This is how muscle fiber recruitment works. So in the beginning, you just have these very hard to fatigue muscle fibers working for you first. They're called slow muscle fibers, and they are great at doing things for a long time. And you don't even need to use very many of them. Like, you got a whole bunch of them in your arm, and if one were to get tired and you're still of a light weight, then it would take a break and another one would fire, and then it would take a break and another one would fire. And it's happened so fast and so smooth that you don't even notice it, and you're able to hold that pen for hours, and it's not a big deal. If you were to make that a little bit heavier, and this was now like a 10-pound dumbbell, then you might go up, 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 and this is actually activating the next threshold into a different type of muscle fiber, type 2 muscle fiber, which fatigues quite a bit faster, but it is a lot stronger. And then if this was to be even heavier, you had a 50-pound dumbbell, you're holding it, whoa, then you would probably need to activate almost all of your muscle fibers, but especially the fast fatiguing ones that are very, very strong. But they cannot recover very fast. They're quite expensive. Your body's efficient. It does what it can with the muscle fibers that would take the least effort. Interesting thing here is that you are not going to train and improve your type 2 muscle fibers unless they are activated in the first place. This is why if you're lifting something like this and it's not very heavy, you might improve the type 1 muscle fibers, those slow twitch muscle fibers, a little bit, but you probably aren't going to be training the type 2 fibers till you activate them. Now, that being said, if you do a really, really long set, then you might fatigue out the slow fibers a whole bunch, and so it starts recruiting other muscle fibers. And this is what I like to do in a low weight, but a very long set. I'm talking like 3 minutes plus. You're doing a similar movement, activating the same muscles more or less. And that way it just fatigues out every single muscle fiber, and then you need to take a nice long break. All right, here's our little picture of motor units. So you have your nerves, and your brain runs through your spinal cord, and then it comes out somewhere, and there's a whole bunch of different things going on here. But you have the little neuron fellow, that funny little orange blob, and then it attaches to a strand to a certain number and location of motor units. And so you have a lot of tiny little motor units in your fingers that are really only a few muscle fibers at once. And they aren't very strong, but they can do what is needed to do. They're very dexterous, they're very precise. Your quads, on the other hand, they are not very precise, but they are very strong for each motor unit activation. So one little neuron goes and activates a whole bunch of muscle fibers at once, which is why it's not very precise, but you can generate a lot of power and a lot of strength without having to think about it and activate all those thresholds of potential like you would in other areas of your body. So looking at this picture of the leg muscles here and some of the bones there, I bet you can guess their function without knowing their name or whatever. I bet you can guess their function from simply observing how big they are and where they attach, what shape they are and whatnot. You can see the lines in the direction that they would contract. So what do you observe? We look at that big red thing. If it was to shorten, what would it do? It would probably flex the hip. It would probably raise the leg, right? And if it was to lengthen, then it's probably going to allow that leg to come back down. Or the big blue muscle, what does that guy do? You can see it plugging in right around the kneecap from up top. If it was to shorten, it would probably extend the lower leg, and that is just what it does. And then it also controls and it stabilizes. The muscles don't just do one thing. In certain situations, they might just be holding still and stable and controlling the movement, while other muscles do the shortening and lengthening. And sometimes they're the primary mover. Now, whether you know names of the muscles and where they insert bone to bone, that's not as important as just feeling and understanding what the movement is that you want to create and having a basic idea of that there are muscles somewhere that attach to there, and I can find them and train them or stretch them or massage them or something to achieve a result that I want to achieve, to bring my body into better default posture and better default movement patterns. We mentioned levers a little while ago. We've got first class levers, which is like your head. And if you're looking down, the fulcrum's here, the resistance is here. So every little bit that you look down more, there's going to be more and more resistance on the muscles below that fulcrum in your neck. We have second class levers where the fulcrum is on the ground and we're lifting the whole body. So it's like the calf muscles and the toes are on the ground. The toe is actually the fulcrum there, and everything's going up from there. I love these ones. Then we have third class levers, like our arms, for instance, hinge joints. And then there's ones that are a little bit harder to identify, but they still work on the similar principle. It's just there's so many of them at once that it's a little bit fuzzy. And I'm talking about the spine here, or even the shoulder blade, because the shoulder blade can go all over the place and be controlled by different muscles. So it's like the effort and the fulcrum might actually be changing depending on the shoulder blade positioning. Now, what other levers can you find in your body, in the hips and all that? So when we talk about form and function and changing our form and function, obviously the principle of adaptation is a huge point here. And there's actually another video about this, but it's worth mentioning. If you've heard of SAID theory, which is specific adaptations to imposed demand, remember, depending on your form and your functioning, your body is going to be adapting to get better at whatever that thing is. It is going to improve those muscle fibers. It is going to strengthen that neural pathway. And if we want to change that, then that's up to us. If we want to push the limits of strength, then we can adapt to become stronger in specific areas. If we want to push our limits of endurance, then we can adapt to endure longer with certain movements and whatnot. And I know this is super obvious, but it's worth mentioning. You might have some really strong habits or strong areas of your body that are used to doing a job that they're not really meant to do. And the example of this that's super common that we work with all the time is the glutes are shut down, and so other little hip muscles try to take over their job and do things like walking. And so they get very, very strong and they get very good at endurance, even though that's not what they're made to do. It's great to have strong working muscles, but if that's at the expense of the glutes shut down, they don't need to operate anymore, then what we need to do is deactivate those muscles that are used to doing the job a little bit more so the glute can step up and do what it's meant to do. And that might take a little while because the glutes are so used to being weak and lazy that we need to really pay attention to training them. All right, body composition. Obviously, this is relevant to our form, what we really look like. And this has a lot to do with our function as well. Are we used to trying to store a lot of extra nutrients? And then we need to have fat to accommodate that? Are we used to going into starvation mode where we also need to store nutrients because we're about to be starving again? Or are we eating a whole bunch of protein and working with heavy loads of resistance all the time, so we need more muscle mass regularly? Where are you? Remember, our body composition is not just fat and muscle. Yes, there's lean mass. Yes, there's fat percentage, but there's also bone density. There's also water weight. There's also certain minerals. You have microorganisms, an essential part of your body composition. And then you have the organizing spiritual energy that makes it all work like an actual human form instead of just a puddle of weird ingredients that don't do anything. All of these are things that we can change in the name of improving our form and our function, because whatever life purpose we want to do, that we want good form and function for. One common measurement that you've probably seen is BMI, like body mass index, and that is your weight to height ratio. And even if you were muscular, this might be totally out of proportion. And if you're on steroids like this guy and you just have so much muscle is not good at that amount. You're probably going to die a lot sooner and have a whole lot harder time just doing normal life activities if you are that muscular. And same if you're super skinny. Some people say, I really want to be skinny, or I really want to be big muscles. We want balanced. We want the right amount of muscle, and we want the right amount of body fat. We don't want to be super skinny. We don't want to be super muscular. We want life in our years and years to our life. And that is pretty moderate as far as, yes, a significant amount of muscle mass. Yes, a reasonably low amount of body fat, but definitely not extreme in any of those directions. Quick little metaphysical question here. Is it true that physical forms reflect the functioning of the mind-spirit organizing force? This consciousness that manifests in the physical world, which is more primary. I want to remind you that form and function go together. Forms, or things, are the way they are because of their function. Things function the way they do because of their manifested form. I like the example of a screwdriver. You don't use a screwdriver as a hammer simply because of its form. You don't use a hammer like a screwdriver because of its form. And yet the screwdriver exists in the shape that it does because it is designed to twist a certain shape of screw by a human hand. That is why it is shaped the way it is. So this principle is true for tools, it's true for organizations, it's true for bodies, it's true for plants, it's true for art, it's true for microorganisms and whatnot. They are the way they are because of their function. And now's a good time to talk about beauty really quick. And I think that being our most holistically and synergistically functional is going to be our most attractive, and vice versa. Our most attractive is most functional. When it comes to the body, symmetry is perceived as beautiful. They did all the tests and stuff. And remember, within this, we're always unique. We're always imperfect in some way. We're always lovable, and we're always transforming. But if we have the functionality to do what we want to do, and we can do it in a pain-free way, that is probably a really good sign that we are in good condition. I mean pain-free without a bunch of painkillers, of course. This principle of symmetry, you can see here, I took some funny photos a little while ago. This is not uncommon. I know that picture on the left, you think that foot is way out there. I see that. People are walking down the road like that. And they're not walking very fast, and it looks like it kind of hurts, but they literally walk like that. Their shoulders are up there, the hips are out of whack, their feet are pointing in different directions. Same with the picture in the middle. That is very common, to have the knees knocking together that much, or even worse. And what's really weird is that the knees are pointing together, like the femurs are actually rotated internally, but the lower leg is rotated externally. What do you think is happening in the middle of the knee joint, that meniscus and whatnot? It's probably super twisted and being ground out because that's not how the knee likes to function. And yet I see it all the time. And then on the right, we have a reasonably balanced picture. It's not perfect. Like this was 4 weeks post collarbone reconstruction, post collarbone break. And so like my shoulders, they are a little bit tiny off in that picture, but I'm working towards more and more level, and I actually have created more and more level now, you can see, from being destroyed. I've been working to correct imbalances that accrued from that injury, for instance. And I bet you have injuries, you have histories, and you have different activities that made you a little bit more biased to doing something, maybe making a compensation to try to avoid pain or whatnot. But do you still need to do that? We all have injuries, we get over them, and we come back to default, or we find a way to make the best of the situation we have and still have the pain-free functionality that we could. I still don't think there are excuses to give up trying to make progress. I knew somebody that completely shattered their leg. They rushed him into surgery, and they recreated his leg, but shorter than the other one, literally. And so obviously his hips were out all the time, and he actually did this for years. His back was really complaining. He did not give up. I checked in with him once in a while, and he eventually finally found somebody that makes custom shoes precisely to the level of his leg deviation. And so that, even just that, made a huge difference. Yes, it's not organic per se, but there's always some sort of solution, even if it is an external one, that can allow us to be in neutral, allow our body to hang out where it wants to be. I want to mention form and function in sports because this is really important to your activities. You know that a ski racer, what they wear, the skis they have, and the form that they ski with, very, very different compared to a powder skier. They have different skis, they ski with different form, different technique and whatnot. Because they have a different game, they have a different environment, a different function that they're playing to. And so they look different. So keep that in mind, because some of your huge athletic performance gains might also come from changing your equipment. I know I learned this lesson the hard way by growing up on the ski mountains with really crappy equipment. And then finally being introduced and understanding good equipment was an absolute game changer almost immediately. I had great athletic ability, but I had crap equipment. And that meant that my form and my function on the mountain was not nearly as good. So maybe you have a similar situation. The same principle applied when you're painting, or if you have a pen. You can be a really good calligraphy artist, but if you have a really crappy pen, then it's not going to look good. So I wanted to sneak that in there, just a little reminder to look beyond the body once in a while to find solutions. Remember, this is step by step. Here's an agreement if you're ready to take it. I agree to create better form and function in my body, my activities, my words, and my life. Every step, every rep, every day, see that trend going upwards. Yes, there may be some funny dips or some setbacks or whatnot, injuries, but overall you want to see that trend, soaring upwards and feel it and live it. Much love. I'll see you in the next one.